welcome everyone. It's Luke here from Warhammer Online. We're going back into the old combat gauge and kickstarting it for season 2.
This podcast is made possible by our patrons.
And joining us today, we've got Fabian.
Yo.
And JP, newest member of Warhammer Online.
Yeah, glad to be here.
You will have seen him. They did a stream me playing a competitive game. So that's our aim, to try and fill your ears full of competitive play, but also add a bit more. We all like the hobby still, so we'll definitely add where we can for the hobby kind of side of things. And the rest of the team will join us every now and then for the Combat Gauge podcasts. So to get us going, we're just going to start discussing the state of the meta, and it'd probably be it's quite a big subject, so it'll take us over a few episodes. But we're just going to start off just talking about what we think is good right now and what we could make what's good right now better.
Yeah, totally.
Let's do this.
So I think probably the most obvious thing, right? Like if you're talking about the state of the meta now in COVID-ridden 2021, you're going to start with the fact that a lot of games are being played online right now on TTS or Tabletop Simulator. And so one of the things I think people talk about a lot is, you're not restricted in terms of buying, building, painting models for TTS. So what do you guys think about how that's had an effect on army building, list building, how much of, I know we've seen the list, at the beginning of lockdown with, 500 salamanders and stuff like that. So we'll start with you, Luke. What do you think? Do you think there's been much of an effect recently in the difference that in lists that you see on Tabletop Simulator, sort of the virtual games versus what you see on a real tabletop?
I found that, it's been going now for a good year since it kicked off, and it's evolving. It's definitely evolving TTS as you look through. People are starting to take more of the norm kind of lists that they would build themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Just try and get their hobby going, and as well as the competitive play. So it's definitely leaned towards more normalized lists, because at the beginning you just have so much spam because you would just never be able to build those kind of lists.
Yeah.
To take a tournament.
Someone had 300 Noblars, I think, in one list or something.
What was it, 27 chain gas, 54 chain gas.
Yeah.
Involved now, a little bit less, but yeah. I think it's good to keep that kind of thing going. I definitely think TTS is a different way of playing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get to the real table, people that have been playing a lot of TTS, I think they'll get into quite of a shock that I've actually got to play this game, and it's gonna have to take. I've only got 2.5 hours to play this game, so I have to just think a lot quicker, gauge the board. The board's going to be a lot different.
Yeah.
You're not just looking at a little screen. You're looking at
yeah.
Again, and
yeah.
I don't know about anyone else, right? But TTS for me is just I love playing it, but it just takes me so long to move something. And, you can play these games. So, I mean, obviously, Luke the other day when he played, you could see that
the other days
in real life they have that game over and done with in maybe an hour and a half. I think, but 6 hours on TTS is
yeah. Well, you get overloaded by a lot of the micro decisions, and also because everything you move has a visible measuring tape. You're moving everything 7.0 inches. It's not 7.1. It's not 6.9. Because you can watch it, it's just okay, here it goes. So it definitely does slow it down. And I agree. I think for me, TTS has always been a great tool for thrashing out whether a list concept works at all or anything like that. You can be what does this matchup look like? But it definitely feels very slow when you try and play okay, I want to make my best move every single turn. Okay. So I agree. I think we have moved a little bit more towards people trying out lists that we're going to see that you build on a tabletop, because I think also people are they at least want to be thinking about lists they're going to take once we get back to the actual table and actual events, which is hopefully soon. Yeah. So
I think it's very good for practicing.
Yeah,
fantastic for practicing. But as in regards to, I mean, nothing can beat Like having like the Games Workshop app or something out on your phone where you're doing lists and stuff, right? I would just rather have like an actual like book in my physical book in my hand. Do you know what I mean? Rather than like using an app. And I think it's the same with TTS, right? I'd rather be drinking with you guys and having a laugh with models rather than that.
Yeah,
it's a great tool, absolutely fantastic tool.
Yeah. I think a big part of Warhammer, obviously, like an event, is the weekend away, right? As you say, you're out.
Right.
You're out on Saturday night till 3 a.m. talking about the impossible game 4 you have. You're just shouting at someone over Cotton Eye Joe at some terrible club. You're like, but I'm just gonna lose on deployment. So yeah, definitely don't get all that for TTS. Okay, so all right, so it's a little bit stabilized towards normalization. So Fabian, we'll start with you this time. What do you think when we do go back, or if there's a meta right now? What do you think? Sort of, what are the top factions, top lists? Who are sort of the boogeymen? Who you got to be out to beat in this meta right now?
Yeah. Okay. So like at the moment, there's I would say there's like a super boogeyman. There's like a tier 0 now, right? Whereas before there wasn't. And for me, the tier 0 is Seraphon, 1,000%. They are just on another level at the moment, and a lot of people, you kind of build your list and then you kind of just think, well, it loses to Seraphon, and you go, oh well, everything loses to Seraphon, so we'll just move on. But yeah, I would say Seraphon like 0, and then going down from there, I would say like KO, your eel lists. I would say right up there at the moment. Well, Gargants were for a little while, but I think everyone's adjusted to them, right? Tzeentch a little bit, but they've come down a little bit as well. But also in the meta, believe it or not, when I think we go back to tabletop, is it's just going to be what people have as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, right. Like you on TTS, I think there is a meta of like Seraphon, KO, eels, that sort of thing. But just in these times at the moment, especially, like people probably just don't have enough to go out and buy a new army, so they just probably still have the army that they have previously.
Yeah, so. That's a good point. Also, I think there might be one tournament that comes out where everyone's got their hobby armies, where they're like, in lockdown, all I wanted to paint was Gobblepalooza, and I'm bringing it. And then after one event, they just lose one game with it, and they're like, throw it in the bin. What is the netlist.com? Straight all into the basket, and they'll get it. Yeah, no, I think definitely Seraphon are an army that we've seen doing super well. Luke, what about you? What do you think sort of top the boogeymen are?
Yeah, so Seraphon is an obvious one. Especially, I was watching a game on TTS, and I was thinking, Idenef versus Seraphon. Idenef got quite a lot of tools to beat the Seraphon kind of fangs as toes tech typical list. We'll deep dive into each army later. So obviously everybody will not know what we're going on about, but just a typical Seraphon list that we'll talk about later. It just has all the tools, and even you think Idenef's you can block the shooting off and stuff, and the cloud he flew his Cloud of Midnight Storm up the board, so he's out unprotected now. And then they have so many out. Seraphon has a spell that he casts in the hero phase. He rolls that 5+. He's not got no Cloud of Midnight anymore. So he got that 5+. They got the out. So they got every out that they need to win the games. He got that, and then the Idenef army just got blew off the table, and it was just like okay. So they're definitely at the top, especially in a highly like a player that can think.
Yeah, for sure.
Just all flows for him. So like, I want this to die. It's going to die, and I want this to die. And play the objective game very like tactically. That just works for them so well. But if you go to a tier below, then I definitely still say Tzeentch. I think as we go in, not the typical Tzeentch is still very strong, but Fabian will tell us later. There's still builds in the Tzeentch book, which if you play right are horrible. And then you've got Idenef. Obviously, they've just been boosted. I'd say. I don't think they've been boosted as much people think, because other armies have got better as well. So
And
there are armies that Idenef don't like that have got better, which just do beat them. Like my list that I'm running at the moment, Knights of the Empty Throne, will just should always be Idenef. It's just they haven't really got the tools to fight through it, and they don't want to fight that list. So I'd say Tzeentch and Idenef, and then there's quite a lot of the armies that probably fall nearly on the same kind of level, apart from the armies like Gloomspite, Ninehorn, Sylvaneth, Beastmen. They're obviously at the bottom, but all the other armies.
Yeah, I think right now we do have it's like quite a balanced state of like this thick middle section of the meta where they're like, I think I've talked about this before, but I remember when the meta was like Nagash and Marathi, and they were the top armies, and sort of we still have top armies now, but they existed at the same time as Ironjawz, where they just had the generic destruction allegiance abilities, so the power gap used to be much, much, much bigger, I think. Whereas now, like, I think a lot of armies have powerful tools, and yes, there's a top and yes, there's a bottom, but there's a lot more play in the game right now.
Sorry. If you like, Owen Jackson is quite well known on the TTS scene.
Oh my God, it's Owen Jackson!
He runs probably the best TTS events at the moment, and he did like a fat in the middle kind of thing, just to see. I mean, arguably, some of them you'd argue that maybe they're not the middle, but he had to just go.
Yeah, someone has to pick.
He set the line, and you look at the top three of that. You had cities like what is it, Hammerhall one with all the Phoenix Guard.
Even
though all the Halaharts were there, you thought they'd just rule without all the Tzeentch and all that kind of stuff there. And then you had the Knights of the Empty Throne in the top three as well. So yeah, there's definitely, all those armies do have game.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a couple effects that happen with things like that, where one, whoever the best players at the event are, if they are bringing, they're likely to bring one of these perceived top armies, they're a competitive player, and that makes the faction sort of look even better than it is. I think and then that compounds the effect of people thinking, well, no one's playing cities anymore, cities must be weak. And it's like, well, no, really. Sometimes people, they play a faction for 3 events, and then they're like, I just would like to play something else, regardless of how well or how badly I did. And I think so. Who's playing what can affect the meta. I'm sure if you took, top players from around the world and were like, you all have to play Cities of Sigmar, which sees Cities of Sigmar winning all these events. Like these. I think, as you say, there are these armies out there who they're not the best army in the game right now, but they're still very powerful, and they can still win. Like, a lot of times you go to an event, you just have to win one game versus that slightly better faction. If you can beat the Seraphon player with your Slaves to Darkness list, even in a tough matchup, then that can just be you set to win the event. If that's the only sort of the tough faction matchup, and you get that, you get lucky, maybe you get a favorable battle plan. You're just maybe a better player on the day or whatever. So I think people can forget, just because people are often taking these, like, the best army they can, people forget about that fat in the middle, those tiers and the tricks and tools that they still have. So if we're talking about Seraphon as the boogeyman, I think, as we said, like, what would be a sort of typical scary, like the components of a scary Seraphon list?
So you got Fangs of Sotek. We'll go into that in a minute. And then you still got.
And that's the sub faction that lets you basically, when you get charged, you can, for a command point, right, you can retreat, and on a 4+ you can also shoot, or is the other way, you can shoot and on a 4+ you can also retreat?
Yeah, so you shoot, and then on a 4+ you can retreat. It's also the one where they get the summoning and the free teleport.
Yeah.
A teleport that just happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the Dracothian's still powerful. That has more access to teleports. It's more into the summoning kind of things, and the Salamanders backing it up. But the generic list has always got a lot of skinks.
Yeah.
Always have Croak, because you just the way that he's so point efficient for what he does.
Mm-hmm. Don't say his name in the mirror; he might appear.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I've noticed as well about that Seraphon list is it has a lot of those teleports, a lot of those ranged. The range damage, the magic control, but it also just has so many bodies with the skinks. Like, as opposed to sort of some of the other ranged if you look at something like KO, where it's like, or Tzeentch. I mean, Tzeentch has a lot of wounds and stuff in the horrors, but it doesn't quite have like those 2 or 3 blocks of 40 skinks that you see in the Seraphon list. So it's got, as you say, it's got tools for all the stages in the game. So if you're looking at Croak, you're looking at 2 or 3 big blocks of skinks and various Seraphon things.
I think you definitely have a block of salamanders.
Some firepower to back it up, and so now sort of into the sort of maybe next part of this thing. So let's say you're going up against Seraphon, and you're not allowed to bring you're not allowed to bring Change Host or the KO attack squadron. What sort of lists would you be bringing that maybe people haven't heard of if you're going up against Seraphon? We'll start with you, Fabian, because you said Seraphon with the boogeyman first.
I think I would just shake my opponent's hand and go to the bar. I think that's probably the best thing to.
He's out. We'll edit this out. This whole thing.
No, I mean, to be honest, I saw quite an interesting one. I think, in all honesty, I think Eels have a lot of game against Seraphon. I saw a fantastic battle rep the other day, and that's. I'm a very much one of those people that learn by seeing and doing, if you see what I mean. And I know a lot of people like to theorize and go by averages and stuff, but I'd rather see something and know
it personal attack.
No. But it's like I'd rather see something, do it, and then I know it can do it, rather than think,
absolutely. For sure,
I roll this many dice or something, because it's a dice game at the end of the day, right? Anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I saw an interesting battle report the other day, and Eels really do have the sort of the damage output. They have the ability to just alpha strike, especially if Lord Croak goes into the the pyramid thing that they have, the terrain piece. The ability to just run into that first turn and kill like Lord Croak and take out a lot of their abilities. Like Luke was talking about earlier on, the Cloud of Midnight as well is fantastic against them. I really do think that army has all the tools to be able to beat them if they go in an alpha. Now, if they can't kill Lord Croak on turn 1, I think that the army's just dead, right? Like, the amount of mortal wounds that he pumps out with his aura. But that leads me on to another point that Luke and I talk about a lot, is sometimes in real life it's about playing the player, not the actual army.
100%.
And sometimes when you deploy your armies and when you do certain things on the table, your opponent reacts to that. Because everyone's human, so they make mistakes, and it's just about capitalizing on that, I think, with playing against lizards. So I think Eels have got a fantastic ability to beat them. Funnily enough, something that's a bit left wing, if we're talking about something else, is Archaon. I think Archaon's got a lot of tools, right? Like Lord Croak can do his spell bomb and everything, but on a 4+, he ignores that. He's got a fantastic armor save. Especially if we put him in Tzeentch, maybe he can use Destiny dice to keep himself alive. He can go in. On the charge, he's got enough damage output to be able to go into these skinks or units and go in there. And there's a couple of factions you can do, like Host Arcanum. You can move forward, extra D6 inches, and then you get an auto unbind as well with that. I think for me, those are the top two maybe. I don't know, JP or Luke, what do you guys think against Seraphon? Like, what's...
Well, funnily enough, my Knights of the Empty Throne has game. Well, not my Knights, so the list I've been running has.
Yeah, not the way you play it, Luke.
Don't play it like I did on that stream. Big mistakes. But it does have game because it has the 6-inch piling, so the Thank set can't do their... I'm going to run away from you and stand and shoot, do all the mortal wounds.
Yeah, so they can only do it if you actually charge them.
Yeah, and it's all minus the hit, so the skinks become less effective. Salamanders do less damage. And I do think the list has the survivability to catch them. That's what you need. You need to have the survivability to then get in combat with them and do the damage to them. Because once you get to the skinks, they're going to fall over. Same with salamanders, they're going to fall over. So, as much as they do have all these skinks bodies to help them, that does not help them for bravery. You kill 9 of their skink guys, they're going to run away. And the same as the skinks. You kill 20, 30 of them. I know they got CPs for days, so they could still...
But they've got to move around.
reduce them to like 10 models, they're not really doing much damage back to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You gotta kill those support heroes, right? That's the end, right?
Just shoot the heroes. That's what you came to hear. You're like, okay.
I do like the Knights list though. The Knights list you're playing is pretty sweet. Like it's got a lot of game against everything. So
yeah, the Vanguard again, a unit. I think that we've seen, like, we haven't, like, that was overlooked for a long time, and now we're just sort of seeing people are saying like, okay, well, it's a 3-up save. They're 5 wounds each, and in Knights of the Empty Throne, where they can become a hero, that really, it makes them able to operate very independently. Because I think you can see a Slaves to Darkness is a hard army, hard faction to play often, because it's got a lot of auras that you've got to keep around these heroes and stuff like that. And, you know, it can be hard. We joke about just shoot the heroes, but it can be hard to get your 5-wound Sorcerer Lord exactly where you need to be to keep up with cavalry or something like that. And so the Vanguard do get around that by, you know, being their own support bubble. And I think that is really, like, now that we're seeing people playing them, we're seeing them getting good results in the matchups. Yeah,
and
for sure.
If anybody wants to see what we think a typical Seraphon list is, we'll post. There's at least 3 of them. There's got a Thunderquake one with triple Bastiladon. Someone's been running in TTS at the moment. Steve Follows used to be quite a good fantasy player as well. So yeah, there's lots of lists in the Seraphon. So we post like 2 or 3. That people can look at, and then like the Knights of the Empty Throne and stuff like that. We'll as we go through the armies, we'll go into that and show on the Discord.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, the Shootcast list is pretty good as well, right?
So yeah, is that the new one that's 1-drop?
Yeah,
with the 3 battalions, right?
Yeah, so it's built around basically the long strike raptors, right? So and they end up shooting, because they shoot in the hero phase and the shooting phase, and then they can shoot twice with another command ability. You're basically they're sort of 2s and 3s and mortal wounds on 6s, or 2 mortal wounds on a 6. So they only have 1 shot each on their war scroll, but when you're pumping them up with those synergies, you're getting multiple shots out of them per turn, and that really ramps the damage up. And I guess again, if you are talking about armies that rely on support heroes and stuff like that, that's definitely one of the things. So I guess that also raises the interesting question. I think everybody, like Seraphon, KO, Tzeentch, all these armies have a lot of ranged damage, and so I mean, we've already talked about Deepkin, traditionally very good, you know, thriving in these shooting metas, but what do we think some other sort of underdog picks are if you're in a shooting meta? Also the Vanguard, again, in the Plague Touched with the Nurgle, they're also good against shooting. But yeah, so if you're going to an event where you know there's going to be a lot of shooting, what sort of factions do you think you want to be busting out? Everyone's like, what army has no heroes? Everyone's just like, so I just wouldn't go, I think, is the answer.
I know. Another Seraphon army.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes that is the answer, right? Fighting, you just fight fire with fire, right? I think it's a good point, Fabian, what you said earlier, which is a lot of times it is about playing the player. I think what people can forget is that at a tournament, your opponent only gets 1 shot to beat your army. And so if you turn up with something like Gloomspike Kids, which I don't think anyone's saying is a super high-powered faction overall, but you turn up with your Gloomspike Kids with your 100 Stabbas versus your Seraphon opponent, and they maybe sit there and they're like, I think I do enough damage to kill a whole block of Grots. And then they don't, then that can be it. The game can just swing on that, and you're like, well, that's fine. It doesn't matter that if we played this game 10 times, my opponent would learn how to beat me every time, you know? Exactly. And I think people can get that way in their own head, where they're like, well, if my opponent does this, and then this, and then this, I lose. And you're like, yeah, okay, if you were playing against yourself in a bad matchup, then maybe, because you know your own army intimately, then maybe you would win. But you turn up to an event like that, and you can, and I think this is going to tie into what we're talking about with off-meta lists. If you turn up with a list that people aren't expecting, that people haven't thought about, well, how do I beat Croak? No one's thought about how do I beat Gobbapalooza, and they probably don't have to in that specific example. But so you can turn up and they're like, oh, I made a mistake because I didn't really know what this army did, and then that's it. I played a game versus Chaos Dwarf, Legion of Asgore, at a tournament, and I had a bunch of Grimghasts and stuff like that, and I was like, my opponent was explaining what his army did. I wasn't really paying attention because I was like, it's Chaos Dwarves, they don't do anything. I charged this I had 30 Grimghasts. I charged a block of Kadai Fire Warriors because I was like, well, there's more than however many of them, so I get rerolls. And then he was like, oh yeah, they're ethereal and they have like 5 wounds each, and so I like bounced off them, and then he attacked me back with Inferno Blades on them, and he was like, yeah, each attack is D3 plus 1 damage. My block exploded, and it was like, I just lost the game off the back of that, basically. And I was like, if I could play that game 10 more times, and I think my army at the time was so much more high-powered that I could probably, and I had so many more bodies, I could probably always win.
Of course.
Not all, I would probably win most of the time, but it's just that, like, my opponent played well, I played badly, and I didn't know what I was doing. And he did, and he just smashed me for it. And like that can happen to in any. You can bring change host versus whatever else, and you can lose because you're just like, oh, I didn't know, that this did this. And again, it doesn't matter sort of what the sort of like what you were saying. It doesn't matter that 90% of the time, 95% of the time, your opponent would beat you if you practiced. They haven't practiced versus your list or versus you, and so you can just rock up and you can be like, oh yeah, this is a terrible matchup for me, but I've thought about playing against Croak loads. My opponent has never thought about playing against Varangard. He's just never thought about this. And again, like obviously everyone's going to explain to their opponent what their army does in theory, but it's not the same until you see it. Really, until you lose to it. That's what makes you learn what an army does. Is you're like, whoa, okay, now I understand what you mean by. Like I had a thing where I had the Royal Mordants list in Flesh Eater Courts, which I think people are still busting out now for Flesh Eater Courts, where you get one free move, one unit in the battalion can move in the hero phase. And you've got a spell that also lets you run and charge. And so you explain that to your opponent, and you're like, yeah, so like, everything can move really far. And your opponent's like, yeah, but they don't expect that the Vargulf goes 16 inches plus a run, and then plus another 16 inches and another run, and then charges. And you're like, because that's 50 inches. So you're like, even in your head where you were like, okay, he can move twice, you're not thinking anywhere on the board this guy could be until you've seen it once. So exactly. I think maybe, so as we get into these off-meta lists, I think a lot of it is going to be your opponent rocks up and they're like, well, what does your Tzeentch list do? And you tell them, and then they're like, oh, now that it's not till they've seen it, and then it's too late. It's far too late. Yeah. They've been crushed by Fabian's off-meta Tzeentch list. So,
go into Tzeentch now.
Yeah. So Fabian, you got some non-change house, some friend-making Tzeentch. That's what we're calling it.
Friend-making Tzeentch. A lot of combos in it. It's what do we call this, Luke? We call this
a happy game.
I'm wondering where you were going there. Well, no, we call this a big brain army, basically. Yeah. So there's various lists out there that if you practice, play the game, play your army hundreds of times, inside out, and like just JP was talking about then, that they don't know your list, you can beat all these top tier armies, and because they do the same thing every time, give plus one to hit with their skinks, more sixes. They get into a routine where every game they do the same thing every time.
Yeah, and they almost always win. Always win. So you sort of don't get that same feedback loop of like, oh wait, what could I have done differently?
Yeah, exactly right. So you kind of so we I think the best thing to do is turn up into a tournament with a list that people haven't really seen before, but inside out. And you do gain an advantage by that because, like JP was saying, they don't know what your list does. It inside out, but you also have that advantage of what their list does.
Yeah, exactly.
So exactly what they're going to do, where they're going to put Croak, where they're going to put the salamanders. What the eels, MSU eels are going to do. What they're going to look to do on turn 3 or teleport. You know what Change Host is looking to teleport, Flamers, Eternal Conflag. For Flesh Eater Courts, you know full well that they've got this big movement, or or these Terrorgeists.
Yeah.
So I think it's better to go off to like a my next tournament I'm going to go into. I'm going to be taking like something that's called a big brain list. So let's have a look at it now. So
that's never changed in any edition. I mean, Fabian played a lot in 7th, and that's just what he did. And then Fabian played me a lot in the background for 8th. He wasn't competitive then. And that's what I did. And then it's just never changed. That's never changed in any edition. So that's just something that you can take away. If AOS ever changes, that just never changes. So you find a list that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And you play that against other competitive players, loads and loads and loads.
Just do absolutely. And as Luke says, that's never changed in tabletop gaming. Because again, it's not Warhammer has never been. No one's playing 500 games a month of Warhammer, so no one's like, oh yeah, even if they've seen the list on paper, they don't know how that matchup goes until they meet you on the tabletop, which is at the event and where you've got the upper hand. And that's not going to say you're not going to win every time, but like it also gives you more bragging rights afterwards, where you're like, this is the Fabian TM big brain Galaxy Brain list. And
I think maybe we should do this, right? Galaxy Brain list of the week or something, right? Whenever we do, we'll bring a Galaxy Brain list.
All right. Break it down for us. All right, you go, Kairos. Okay. We've immediately lost some friends.
Yeah. So the thing is, right? When you turn up with your army, and they're like, "Oh my god, Tzeentch is going to be change host," and they look at your army and you're like, "Oh, what? There's no flamers? There's no Lord of Change? You don't get the free teleport every turn? Like, what's this is okay, maybe I could beat this. This is easy."
You're luring them into a false sense of security.
You're like, "Oh hi, I just brought a friendly Tzeentch list. Hey, how you doing? Yeah." Come on. Okay, so this is Disciples of Tzeentch. The Coven is actually not going to be Eternal Conflag. It's going to be Host Duplicitous. So just to give you a quick overview of that, that is the main thing about it is that you can't retreat from
anything.
The army basically. So you can't retreat. You get a nice little artifact which gives you +1 to save as well. And the command trait is that Tzeentch demons wholly within 9 of the general get to reroll their casting. All right, which is pretty nice as well with Tzeentch. So this is what we were talking about before, and a big brain list. It's what I like to call a control list. So you're basically doing everything you can to control your opponent's army and really disrupting what they're doing. There's various things and different things that I've done with this list. This is a current iteration that I'd seen beforehand, and I'd actually seen it being run in a tournament. I've made a couple of tweaks. But the guy who was playing it, you could see that there were so many options. And again, it was on TTS. There were so many options for him to do, and he'd only played it for a couple of times that he kind of overwhelmed himself, if you see what I mean. But so this is what we're talking about. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I think in some ways that can be a cool thing with the list where if you can look back on a game that you lost and be like, well, I could have done these 10 things differently. It allows you a lot of scope to like not feel frustrated with the list because you're like, well, I had these other options. Rather than being, if you're like, well, I always sort of, when I was playing Host Duplicitous Change Host, that you have some options, but a lot of times your games are you're teleporting forward, you're tagging your opponent, they can't move, and you're sort of like, well, it's hard, when you lose, it can be harder to break down why you lost because you've only ever done the same thing.
And that's what I was talking about before. It's like monotonous, right? You just do the same thing over and over again. You teleport your 20 horrors forward, and then it either wins or not, and that sort of thing. Whereas I think Luke and I are very similar, where we try and build lists that beats everything. If you see what I mean? Yeah. Like, we don't like to be able to like leave ourselves open to anything. Like this Tzeentch, one of Tzeentch's hard matchups is KO, and this list has, believe it or not, has some game against KO as well. So so we talked about the host itself, and it's very important that it is Host Duplicitous, and I will explain to you later on why that is so important. Okay. So leaders, we've got Kairos Fate Weaver as absolutely fantastic with the Bolt of Tzeentch. He is a way of getting an extra spawn out of the army. Okay, so that's again summoning models,
the spawn you also can't retreat from.
Yes, so it does become Hoshi Pistis. So him being able to absolutely fantastic caster, one of the best in the game. 3 spells a turn. Also learning the other spells in the army as well if he's nearby. And again, there's a massive reason for that. So yeah, him and his spawn, absolutely fantastic. I've got a Magister on Disc of Tzeentch. What do you say, Luke?
He's got his little cuddly toy that gives people.
Yeah. We've got a Magister on Disc of Tzeentch with the Shield of Fate. Now, you can have this as the Shield of Fate, which is basically you get abilities of how many Destiny dice you have. So you can get things like reroll saves, reroll ones to your save, or reroll saves and ignore spells as well. So you can cast that. Another big thing about him is that he's actually a 16-inch move character as well. And he also has another spell, which you're able then to create a spawn. So D3 mortal wounds to a unit and create a spawn. Okay, so you can see where we're going with this now. All of a sudden, we're creating spawn in combat with units that, they can't retreat from, and you tag them 3 inches away. Have a happy cuddle. Blue Scribes, he's in the list. As you can pretty much see, everything basically flies and has quite fast movement. So the characters pretty much run around as a block, and the Blue Scribes gives the ability for all these guys to reroll their casting. Friendly Tzeentch wizards. So it means that the mortals of the Magister and Disc and the Chaos Sword and Manticore, which I'll get to in a second, can reroll their spells, which are absolutely fantastic. I've got a change caster of Herald of Tzeentch, who is the general. And the reason why he's the general, and he has the ability of you might think, well, he's just on foot, right? He's only like a 5-6 inch movement. Well, he's got the will of the Phantom Lord. So what happens is he sits back with a couple of units of horrors and gives those horrors rerolls and himself a reroll. The first turn he can be with your block and everyone gets the reroll, the demons that is. But once everyone moves off for this army, believe it or not, this is actually an army that's going to move towards the opponent. Believe it or not, for a Tzeentch army, you need something to hold your own objective and still produce those fate points to summon units. All right. We've also got a Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Manticore. Now he's interchangeable. It's something that we've talked about for a little while. He can also be a Chaos Demon Prince of Tzeentch, who gets -1 to hit. Now, if you give the Demon Prince the artifact, he has a 3-up save. He now becomes a 2-up save.
Yeah.
And being able to command, exactly right. 2-up save, -1 to hit, can have the command ability of giving himself reroll ones to his save in combat as well. So he, all of a sudden, you've got a little bit of a tanky unit, depending on the meta, that can go into something, tag it 3 inches away, and all of a sudden they can't retreat from that Demon Prince. So they're not doing much to it at all. All right. So you can shut down, a big threat. Now, talking of shutdown, this is the big boy of the list.
I see why he wasn't on the original. You didn't have him at the beginning when we were talking about this being a friend-making list.
So Be'lakor, right? And this is. So Be'lakor is one of the reasons why you have game against KO and some of these other lists as well. Just being able to shut down that Ironclad at the appropriate moment. Yesterday, I played a game against Archaon. Now, Archaon is like, my list cannot kill Archaon at all. But Be'lakor just sat there and just went, right, for 2 turns. Thank you very much. You're not going to do anything, Archaon. And that's an 800-point model that they cannot afford not to do anything. So, again, we're coming into the realms of control where, he just doesn't do anything unless they roll a 5-up, obviously. But, and another thing to note with the control is that Kairos Fate Weaver has an ability that he can change 1 dice, from a list on the Tzeentch of mine or my opponent. So he can. One of the reasons why he's in here is he can stop charges as well. So Archaon did, once he freed himself from Be'lakor, went to charge into my character block, and Kairos just changed that 6 to a 1. I was like, no.
I feel bad for the Archaon player already.
Yeah. To round out the list, we've got a couple of units of pink horrors and a unit of 10 acolytes. The horrors and the acolytes just to hold objectives, sit back, just cast spells where you can. The pink horrors are fantastic because they're 50 wounds pretty much each. And they're not there to be healed or anything. They literally just be sit there on objectives and be a kind of a tar pit which people can't retreat from as well. Mm-hmm. We've also got 3 endless spells in the list. We've got Geminids, Palisade, which you need in the list because you can put all your characters behind that Palisade, and all of a sudden KO, which doesn't really have any characters that can magic. You tend to find like eel lists as well. They don't have any sort of magic and stuff, so you can use that. And you might be wondering, well, eels don't shoot, but I'll get to this in a second. And then Umbral Spell Portal as well. So this actually, I've been trying out the Sigil of Tzeentch for 40 points. And that potentially, may go in as well because that actually went off and made Archaon half movement as well, which is
my god, this poor Archaon player just moved about 4 inches in 2 hours. He was like, "No, great. When can we play again?"
But the Sigil of Tzeentch as well. It also can create you if you roll a 1. It's a bit random, so I probably wouldn't take it in the tournament. But if you roll a 1 on the Sigil of Tzeentch, you can also create another spawn. So that's 3 spawn a turn you can create.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Palisade. It's got a fantastic ability if you're within a certain amount of inches. I think it's 3 inches of it, or 6 inches. If you roll a 5 up, they get -1 to hit. Now that's not what we use it for. What we use it for, one of the combos, is we use Kairos or the Magister on this to create a spawn 3 inches away from a unit. We then summon the Palisade in between that unit and the spawn, and all of a sudden that mega unit cannot attack the spawn and they can't retreat, which means that they just can't attack, can't do anything, can pile in potentially towards the spawn, but have to move around the Palisade.
Yeah.
And the Palisade is stuck there, and it means that either their casters have to spend a cast to try, to get rid of the Palisade in their turn.
Which you could also Kairos if you needed to.
Yeah. Or you can Kairos, you can Kairos and get rid of that Palisade whenever you want to. There's no problems at all.
Yeah.
So against things like Varangard, you can all of a sudden kill the Varangard and put a Palisade in between yourself with a spawn, and the Varangard can't really do much. So it's one of those where it's.
I like that. I like that combo.
Yeah, there's so many combos in this. It's unreal. The Geminids give you -1 to hit and -1 attack. You also have Arcane. I believe it's Arcane Suggestion. I think it is.
Oh yeah, that's real nasty. -1 to hit and wound, or -1 to save, right?
There you go. So all of a sudden now, with Geminids, you've got -1.
Got like -18 to hit.
You got -2 to hit, -1 to wound, and then you've got Be'lakor, who can then give another -1 to wound. So now all of a sudden that unit is -2 to hit, -2 to wound. You kind of get to
you're just kind of absolutely turning these units off, yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of see where I'm going with. The Manticore is a fantastic spell which can affect hordes. So you roll dice for each model in that unit. Say if it's like 40 strong, so you roll 40 dice. Every 5 up is a mortal wound, and every 6 you roll is D3 mortal wounds. So that's absolutely fantastic as well to clear hordes as well. And then you've got the Blue Scribes, who's got Tzeentch's Firestorm as well. Again, on a 2+, he can't be dispelled. Roll 9 dice. Any 6s are D3 mortal wounds. Yeah. So you kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about with a Galaxy Brain, big brain.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to think about, right? Because, as you say, the Blue Scribes can cast 1 spell on a 2+ that can't be dispelled.
Yeah.
And you can use that for something like, you can use it for Geminids if you really need to hit everything inside a KO boat, for example. And again, there are these armies out there. I think KO have access to it. Host Arcanum do, Knight Incantor, the automatic unbinds, and you can just tech list as well, and you can get around that by being the one spell I really do need to cast is the Blue Scribes on a 2+, casting that spell. And also what can happen, you've got you've obviously Tzeentch, you've got a lot of unbinds there, a lot of spells to cast for you, a lot of unbinds for your opponent, and if they're doing something like waiting because they really want to unbind one certain spell, you can have the Blue Scribes cast it because they also learn on a 4+, they'll learn spells cast near them. And so, as you said, there are just a lot of decisions you can be making and that you're forcing your opponent to be making, in every phase with the list like this. And yeah, it's spooky. And if your opponent sees this list coming into a tournament, this is exactly the sort of list where I just see it. You see that you've got it game 4, day 2, and you're just like, what? You're just asking your mate, you're like, what is this? What am I looking at? And
you're also I can beat that quite easy.
Yeah, you're sort of like, I guess this guy's just playing random Tzeentch. He's not playing meta Tzeentch. He just likes these models. And you sort of
nice thing as well, the Chaos Sorcerer Lord, he has an ability that can give a Slaves to Darkness unit re-rolling saves. So you have like Bellicor, which is a Slaves to Darkness unit, and himself as well. Now he has a 3-up save, so he can, you all of a sudden you've got a monster who's half decent in combat as well, running around with a 3-up rerollable armor save, or you can give it to Bellicor as well.
And Bellicor is ethereal as well.
Right. Like,
and I think again, when you have this sort of as you say, the Chaos Sorcerer Lord, he's not a Terrorgeist, but he can fight. Yeah. And when you have a good control list like this, where you are tagging things in combat, your Chaos this is too hard to say. Chaos Sorcerer Lord on a Manticore can get into someone's backlines and be charging their Croak, be charging their 5-wound hero, because nothing else can move. And so the Sorcerer Lord can get close in one turn and then just fly over and charge into almost whatever he wants when you've got those spawns and those horrors all 2.99 inches away, locking you in place. And I really like that trick with I played a lot of Tzeentch, right? I played a lot of Host Duplicitous. I know about getting tagged with spawns and stuff, but I would not have anticipated the combo of where one of my model, I get stuck in combat with a spawn that's 3 inches away and I can't get towards it because there's a palisade blocking me off. And then I try and dispel the palisades in my turn, and Kairos changes my roll to a 1. And it's like, and that's from someone who's played the faction, a lot. And so there are going to be people who, again, they're like, okay, I'm playing KO. I've won 3 games in a row before turn 2. And also, that's nothing against KO players. Shoot people. They're just like, oh, I've had 3 quite quick games. I'm going into this Tzeentch game. Okay, it's Tzeentch. I don't know what it is. Doesn't look that scary. And then suddenly all this stuff is happening, and they're like, wait. You're like, Gemini's hits everything in the boat? And you're like, yeah. You're like, and the Ironclad can't move? You're like, yeah. You're like, and I finally made 1 charge and you changed it to a 3? You're like, yes.
You're using your Destiny dice for your armor saves.
Yeah.
It's one of those where there's combos where every time I play it, there's a new combo in it.
Yeah.
There's just so many buffs. There's so many debuffs you can give. There's so many things where there's shenanigans where you can do, like, you can keep your, like, for instance, like Kairos Fate Weaver, he can learn, like we were talking about the blue scribes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So turn 1, a lot of people give you first turn as Tzeentch because a lot of your spells are 18 inches away. So what I do is I use that to cast loads of spells into the air, and everyone's like, yeah, I'm not going to stop any of that because it doesn't affect me. But each time you're learning it with blue scribes, right?
And you're getting
all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, Chaos Lair Manticore, he'll cast his spell, and then your blue scribes is like, oh yeah, I'll roll a 4 up and I'll learn that. And all of a sudden, boom, 2+, I'm going to kill that 40 block of skinks. And Lord Croak can't stop it.
Yeah.
It's like what?
Yeah, exactly. And it's stuff like that just, again, like, you can explain what your list does, right? You can be like, this guy has an AoE spell, and the blue scribes can learn other spells. And it's just very hard in the 5-10 minutes you have before a game to put that together in your head. Because you're like, okay, well, Lord Croak can just unbind the spell from this guy, and the blue scribes can do something else, I don't know. And then you get into the game, and you're like, well, the blue scribes are going to cast it because they learned it earlier. And your opponent's like, I remember you told me that, but I did not think it would come to this. I didn't.
Yeah, it's nasty, and it's one of those games. It's one of those armies where, again, I'm going to have to play this 100 times before I know every single game and know inside out and be quick with the army.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think it is cool because there's a lot of scope for learning. You're going to see a lot of times you're going to be like, well, maybe I should have cast, instead of the damage spell, I should have been casting -1 to wound on this unit. Or you're like, I didn't need to cast 4 debuffs on this one unit because it, -1 to attack just shut it down anyways. And you have so many decisions at every point that it does and it also, right, aside from getting you better at this list, it also just turns you into a better player overall, right? Because you're having a very sort of engaged experience with the game and how to play it, and that means like that you're learning more about how Age of Sigmar works in general, or at least with these with like that sort of control archetype. So you're without playing a sort of cookie cutter one combo list. You're just thinking about the game way more, and that can just help accelerate your learning process as an Age of Sigmar player.
Yeah, exactly right. Like it's just and we've not even really talked about the summoning of this list. This list can cast 12 spells a turn, so that's 12 fate points, and that's on turn 1, summoning 10 blue horrors.
Yeah,
like turn 1, and every turn this can summon 10 blue horrors. So you're getting over 5 turns. You're getting 50 blue horrors in the game. I mean, you can summon other things if you choose. There's no problems at all. But just for objective grabbing, this is absolutely.
And more no retreat units. And again, a big thing about no retreat is it does start, like, the board gets very difficult very fast, because you're not just, you're like, okay, I can't move my block of big infantry onto this objective. So what do I need to grab it with? You're like, okay, I need to grab it with something else. But now there's 10, so the 10 blue horrors wouldn't be a roadblock to anything except for the guy you now need to tag the objective, which is a 5 wound hero. So because of that no retreat and corner tagging and debuffs, you end up I've had these games with Host Duplicitous where you're like, you've just got 10 blue horrors sitting right behind like loads of things that could just kill it, but it just can't move backwards back onto the objective to take it. And you're like, okay, there's a Knight Incantor just fighting 10 blue horrors for 2 turns and he never gets the objective. And so again, but it's also an easy army because it doesn't have the output, like the combat output. You can easily make a misstep and you're playing versus something like Iron Jaws and you're like, yeah, I tagged this block with my pink horrors. And he's like, yeah, I did all 50 wounds in 1 turn. Because it's like 2 damage, charged, fought in the hero phase, now it's gone. You're like, now the middle of my plan is relying on holding these things in place. The middle of the board is blown open. My opponent's won priority, and now everything explodes. So
exactly. So this is what I'm talking about before, where you need to learn it inside out. You need to know what this list can do, what it can't do, and it's very fragile, very, very fragile. Like there's nothing to say that KO can just be like, oh yeah, I'll take turn 1. I'll just fly in front of your army and I'll just blow up all your wizards and everything, right? I don't have the rerolls to save anymore.
Sorry, KO players.
KO players like,
Yeah, so this is just another good example why Fabian's written is what we're calling a big brain list. Is if it makes any mistakes, it will just crumble. Where if you give the viewers a typical example of what a competitive list, they might not know what that is. Like, so Change Host, normally it will have the Lord of Change in, a lot of horrors. If you go Dub Host, mainly horrors, maybe a few more heroes for the summoning side of things, and it has the teleport. Or it goes the Conflag route where it has the Exalted Flamer and the Flamers, and it does a lot of shooting and burst damage and has the Rend, but a lot of less wounds. But it always has that teleport, that it always works similar. That's the kind of list that you will sit at a tournament. Whereas this is different. This is you're having to think a turn 2 while they're doing their turn 1. I know you normally do in any tournament game, but this even more so because you got to think, am I going to summon this to stop this? Am I going to cast this spell to stop this? Whereas a lot of our what we say are meta armies, that you kind of know what they have to do in their next turn. Whereas this is adapting every opponent. That's why it needs to in the game.
And there are obviously right. There are reasons. I think it's not like we're saying, okay, if you play a list like this, you're gonna always get way better results than if you just play what people think is a standard net list. But I think you will get sort of different results in that if you play Change Host Duplicitous. The standard list, which is a standard list for a good reason, is very strong and it's been fine-tuned by a lot of players. It's a great list, but when you do get to, game 5 at your tournament and you're versus KO, it's a bad matchup for you, and your opponent has probably played that match multiple times. They've thought about it a lot. They're like, okay, I know how Change Host works. I've done this. And that can be a harder game for you than if you were playing, again, a weaker list, and that could, like a sort of quote-unquote weaker list, because your opponent then doesn't know what's going to happen. He's like, okay, I know I've got to kill the Lord of Change, but also now I've been Bellacored, which doesn't happen to me normally when I think about how I play against Change Host. So these lists can help give you the edge in those otherwise difficult games where your opponent, as we've talked about, has practice for that exact matchup. And so I think when you are building, your sort of own TM list, like that can be a good thing to think about, is it does give you advantages in situations where just playing a really strong list doesn't. Even if obviously in a bunch of your games you're going to get other advantages from playing other lists. I think a lot of times if you're like, oh, I really I want to sort of push myself to that next level, you're like, well, now I'm taking a list that helps me beat other really good players and learn a lot about the game, which is sort of like a great combo for accelerating your Age of Sigmar learning curve. So I think that's why it's just really cool to see lists like this. And it's the sort of list that if you go to a tournament, you lose to Change Host, you tell your friends, you're like, I played against Change Host. They're like, oh, unlucky. Did you win? You're like, no. And then no one ever thinks about it ever again. Whereas like you come home from your event and you're like, I lost to this Tzeentch list. And they're like, was it Change Host? You're like, I don't know what it was. They're like, I don't know what happened, but I couldn't move like ever.
Yeah.
You're like, my army was like the 1980 points I brought, and then like 200 extra points of chaos spawns, just all up in my business. And you're like, I was palisaded.
Well. This list is 1970, so you normally get a triumph as well, right?
Great.
Which I always forget.
You got too much other stuff to think about.
This is what I mean.
Yeah.
It's just a great example of so we're going, what is good and what is better.
Yeah.
This might not necessarily be better to a lot of people, but we're just going into what we're thinking. We're going, what is good and what is better, and this is definitely what we think if you want to go to a tournament.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
This is definitely better if you had the games.
Yeah.
Like, this is so interchangeable. Like, you could take this spell pool out and put something else in. You could take the Mantle Core out and put, like I was talking about, Prince, or even a Chaos Lord on Karkadrak. You could change some of the, for instance, if you take the Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Mantle Core out and put the Demon Prince in, all of a sudden you can add a second unit of Acolytes in, so now you have more bodies. Like, there's this list is very interchangeable of what you want to do. So when I did see it from on a TTS tournament, I kind of fell in love with it straight away and started working on it a little bit more. So I would definitely think outside the box if you can. Because there are some lists in books that you may not have, you may have a book and you might think, all right, I definitely want to play, Tzeentch Change Host, that's the tournament army, that's the go-to army, but there are so many powerful builds out there.
Yeah.
People just are not playing for whatever reason, or you've got to think that the meta changes. And sometimes lists like this that wouldn't be good before are now very good.
Yeah. I think there's, again, a lot of these options. I think gamers can sometimes fall a little bit into the sort of, if you're not first, you're last trap, where they're like, is this the best list? No? Okay, it's unplayable. Whereas that's just not the case. And I think also, it's not really the case. This is quite a strong list, but like I've been working on a Gloomspike Gist list, which is like, again, mainly, it's just lots of models that I like. It's got some grots.
A Trog list.
Yeah. It's got Luke always playing because it used to be a Trog list, but now it's just a mixed Gits list. But it's got some Trogs, it's got some Grots, it's got a bit of everything, and it's not a super competitive list. But and maybe I do have to like just concede that if I go to a tournament and I play against the best list in the game, I'm probably just going to lose that 9 times out of 10. That's fine. I'm not going to lose all of my games 9 times out of 10 just because I'm playing this less power list. I've played versions of the list versus KO, versus Daughters of Cain, versus Change Host, and I've had both like wins and losses with it. And again, some of it is, I played versus just one opponent who was like, whoa, I'm really scared of these big blocks of Trogs because I know they put out, they're not a great list, but they do put out a lot of damage. So he was just sort of avoiding them. And then I won a couple priority rolls. I got ahead on scoring and I ran away with the game. And it was just sort of like, again, me and my opponent both looked back at it and it was like, well, if I'd actually just charged those Trogs, I would have lost half my guys and killed all the trogs, and then it would have been over. But you only get that one time at a tournament. So, and the opposite can happen too, where your opponent's like, I don't know what trogs are. They don't really do. They're not good, and they're not good. Like they're not a super competitive unit, but they get, they're damage 3, they're Ren 2. They just charge into something. They get a long charge, and you're like, oh wait, suddenly I've taken all these wounds that I didn't want to take. I lost this unit. I lost this screen or something like that. And then it just takes a couple other things to go your way. And you're like, oh, okay. Like I've won. Again, I think like these lists, like I think people can maybe sometimes get confused between like a list that's not top tier and a list that's unplayably bad. If you practice your list and you are just like, you use your generic Age of Sigmar game knowledge, you can get these wins versus anyone with, like almost any list that you've thought about, like any list that you've like, oh, I practiced this, I've thought it out, this is why these units are here. You can get those results sort of no matter how meta breaking that your army might be, because again, you're the expert when you get to the table as opposed to your opponent.
Yes. I think we've definitely covered. So we've covered Seraphon briefly. We didn't go deep dive into it because they're the obvious. But like I said, we'll post the list on Seraphon. We've gone into Tzeentch, so if we for the next episode, if we go into to talk about the next ones that we talked about with KO and Ivaneth, if we go into that, and then maybe throw in something like what Fabian's done.
Yeah, another list.
Is better, kind of maybe a different army.
Oh man, I got a list for days.
So if we could probably throw Slaanesh in there.
Yeah, I think Slaanesh is another great one for exactly that sort of list of like, like Tzeentch, there's a lot of powerful stuff in that book that just right now we're not seeing, but that doesn't mean it's not powerful.
I've got a good list for Slaanesh, don't worry. It's it's to the left, Beyonce, but yeah, I got it, man. That's a hint, right? I
swear to God, if we see Be'lakor again.
Be'lakor's in every list.
Yeah, exactly.
If we end that now, our episode 1, it's a very large topic that we're going to go. We're diving into, and we'll try and cover at least all the armies over 3 or 4 episodes.
Sweet.
So episode 2, we'll cover those next armies, and I'll post the list for the Seraphon for everyone to see.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot to everyone who watched or listened or faxed this to someone or whatever happens in 2021. I had a great time.
Yeah, me too, man. That was cool.
And thanks to all our patrons that they helped this happen. So
without you guys, would not be possible. And we wouldn't have had to expose the world to Fabian's new filth. All right. Now we're out.
This video is made possible by our patrons. If you want to know more about how to support us, click on the link to the right.